Peace and welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host Farajii Muhammad. Today we got a great show for you. Let's talk about the latest in the killing of Daunte Wright, as the sentencing of Kim Potter has been officially announced. We'll get some reactions from our culture crew. Also, let's talk about, has liberal democracy run its course? We'll talk about the latest that David Brooks, New York Times columnist, had to say, and get some reaction about that as well. And at the 4 o'clock hour, we have an author chat with Majora Carter as she discusses in her new book, Reclaiming Our Community, as we look at the issue of gentrification. Later, we have a special segment called Telling Our Story, and I'm going to give you this week's last word. That's all happening on tonight's edition of The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. Let's get ready to rock and roll. Let's go. Folks, welcome to the show. Man, oh man, we got a lot to talk about on this Friday afternoon. So many things are happening, but the big story is the sentencing of the former police officer, Kim Potter, who was responsible for killing Daunte Wright. This is the same woman, if you remember the case, folks, this is the same woman who screamed that she was trying to reach for her taser and ended up reaching for her service weapon, shooting Daunte and killing him fatally while he sat in the front seat of the car. The word is at this point that she has been sentenced for 2 years in prison. 2 years in prison in the killing of this young man. And we want to jump right into the conversation, getting some reaction from our culture crew around this case. This is another high-profile police brutality case, another case where there have been a lot of questions. And I'm gonna keep it honest with you folks. At first, I did not think that she would even get convicted. But to see her get convicted and now being sentenced to 2 years, it's still a disappointment. It is a very, very big disappointment. I want to go to my culture crew. We're joined by Shaquia McKenzie, who is an activist and educator. And also we're joined by Bakari Jones, who is an activist and strategist, and getting both of their reactions to this breaking news story. Shaquia, Bakari, thank you so much for joining us once again. Good to see you, sisters.
Great to be on. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely, absolutely. When we talk about this former Minnesota police officer, again, she fatally shot Daunte Wright while yelling taser. We saw the footage of her saying taser, hearing taser, but then reaching for her service weapon. Bakari, starting with you, I mean, she's getting 2 years. And I know that a lot of people say that, to get any type of conviction, let alone a sentence, is hard enough for any police officer. But this still doesn't feel like the justice that I think that many people were hoping and seeking. What's your take on it?
I'm in complete agreement with you, Farajii. I don't think it's the type of justice. I want to just also start by saying that I don't know that for anyone that's lost a loved one, especially lost a loved one through such a violent means, I don't know that there's a specific term sentence that anyone could serve that's actually going to appease that level of hurt and pain.
Yeah.
So just want to say that. So I don't know what the actual sentence would be, but I do think that it's more of what many of us anticipated. To your point, Farajii, I think, we were somewhat surprised that she was sentenced at all. But then to see such a mild, relatively speaking, sentence, it does just sort of feel like a slap in the face. So, I mean, I want to hear Shakoya's take on it, but to be honest, for me, these types of conversations, I think, are steering our country, certainly our city, more into the direction of restorative justice and what that looks like and what it needs to look like in the future.
Yeah. Shaquia, what's your take on this? I mean, 2 years. She was initially, the Minnesota jury had initially found her guilty last year of first and second degree manslaughter. The first degree manslaughter charge carried a maximum sentence of 15 years in prison and or a $30,000 fine, and then a presumptive second sentence of 6 to 8.5 years, but the judge there, District Court Judge Regina Chu, opted to give Porter a lighter sentence than recommended by state sentencing guidelines. So what do you take away from this?
As you and Bakari have said, I think it was a surprise for many of us who are used to watching these sorts of trials in anticipation of justice, or being disappointed again in that justice doesn't wave in the hand of the victim. It was a surprise that she was convicted. I do not believe it was much of a surprise, just as a fan of law and prosecution. The prosecutors did a great job in making the facts around this case very clear. I think the overwhelming evidence of and proof that she had been a training officer, not just an officer, that she should have known better, essentially. In short, she should have gotten the ruling that she did. The sentencing is quite surprising. She got 2 years and could have possibly gotten anywhere between 20 and 23 years. And it speaks to,
that's huge.
It just speaks to the overwhelming exception of due process for police officers in this country. This due process took place, but there's a sense of empathy and sympathy that is never extended to victims and the families of victims in the same way that it is for law enforcement officers. And I think any reasonable individual understands the pressure that police officers and law enforcement officers face each day. We're no way, when we see these rulings and we acknowledge them as they are, a slap on the wrist, we're in no way making excuse for the fact that they're human and they make mistakes. It's the fact that justice should be served as justice was not experienced by the victims of these cases. And we have just an extremely slanted judicial system where we have millions of offenders serving sentences that are laughable in the face of this one for nonviolent offenses. And so it just is a smack to the Black community, on the behalf of Dante's family, really immediate to his family, but it's a slap in the face.
I mean, I think that's the best way to describe it, Shaquille. Just being a slap in the face, just because. And folks, you probably have been seeing it here on the Black Star Network. We've been running, those proceedings that happened earlier today. And once again, Kim Potter just started crying as she's, talking about, the quote unquote chaotic moment. Take a look at this video here, folks. It's hard to describe, or to have this level of empathy when things happen like this. And, you can kind of see in her body language how her shoulders are hunched over. It's always been a part of this conversation where we talked about the way she dressed and how she wanted to portray herself to the people. And so, you have this type of situation. And it leaves me, Bakari, speechless a little bit, because we know that as much as we're seeing this demonstration, and you pointed it out in your opening remarks, that this young brother, who he had a little run-in with the law, right, like a lot of young Black men do, not gonna say a lot, but some rather, excuse me. But we have run-ins with the law, and it ended up in such a fatal, with a fatal ending. Mm-hmm. And it's just really sad, because all of that other stuff that we're seeing, the demonstration that she's giving off, the whole thing, it doesn't matter, because you made a decision to take a person's life when you really didn't have to. Correct. That's the thing, Bakari. She really didn't have to shoot in the car.
she not only did she not have to take the life, right? Again, she was a trainer, right? So there's just a different expectation when you are the person who is in a leadership position. And on top of that, you also have the fact that she endangered other people. And that was the piece that was super surprising to me in terms of the sentencing, is that I think that, to some extent, as Shakoya just said, that, the way that the prosecution executed their strategy, to find her guilty was executed successfully, but that the sentencing it was just all, very, very mild. And I think that for me, it's surprising considering that she put other human beings also in danger. Not only did she take a life, but she also risked the lives of other people, as well. So that for me is surprising. And as it relates to her body language, I think that it's important. I think it's theatrical, but I think that we also, as Black folks in this country, we understand the power in the tears of white women and the power that they're able to evoke. And I would just want to put it out there, is that what we are seeing when it comes down to the sentencing? So.
And I think the other part of this sentencing, she's already, spent some time in prison, and they were saying that she only essentially she's only going to have to serve another 16 months
exactly.
In prison. And it's just, again, I mean, in a situation like this, and I've seen this time and time again, where she can leave Minnesota, start her life over in another state, and if she decides she wants to get back into law enforcement, the likelihood is pretty high. And that's the end of that part of her story, that chapter of her story. But she can get back into it. Now, will she? I don't know. She may not. But she is still going to be, I think, welcomed in a way that we have been seeing with a lot of these former police officers, that they're going to still be welcomed by any agency, or, like you said, Bakari, she's a trainer, so she has that skill set. So she can go back into the law enforcement community and kind of pick up the pieces and move on, Shakoya.
Yeah, I suppose that she could. I wanted to build on a point that Bakari was making, in that white fragility, white fear, white tears oftentimes creates this perception that remorse or regret makes up for the action that was done, and or that their fear just is more pronounced and should be considered more overwhelmingly than whoever is adverse to that. And the consequence of her actions were immediately in her mind when this situation happened. If you watch the tape of the incident, she did not follow the car. She, in terms of trying to chase down the car, even when it crashed, tried to pursue to render aid to Dante or the passenger, his girlfriend. Immediately upon the action of firing her gun, her first concern was her well-being, or lack thereof, losing her job, becoming prosecuted, when she was rendered, emotionally frantic, as was described by her defense. And I think that there's so much confusion and frustration in our community when these situations take place, when these cases play out the way they do, in knowing that not only is the assailant going to be forgiven to some means, if they're ever prosecuted at all, because in history's past, oftentimes they've not been prosecuted, but when they are, the opportunity for them to go on and live a regular life and live a life of fame and recognition, if you will, for individuals who are aligned to law enforcement officers or the extended bureaus and institutions such as the Federation of Police that oftentimes, exalts these folks to heroes. It's very frustrating. It's very confusing. We know what is at the basis of these type of decisions: bias, We know what is at the helm of power in terms of how these just sentences continue to take place the way they do. Judges and who's sitting on the bench, who interprets the law and essentially determines the outcomes of what will happen to people who commit crimes. And there is much work to be done, as we talked in our last episode when I was here, about grassroots organization to essentially really start to get behind who's sitting in these benches and why they make the decisions they do. There's a lot of work to be done in understanding that and in influencing change in that area.
Shaquaya, I just so appreciate that point, and I don't think we can say that enough. You're right. We talked about it the last time, and we got to keep emphasizing it. This is something that I've heard Brother Roland often talk about, and I'm in full wholehearted agreement about. The fact is that these judges are dictating. I mean, of course, the role of a judge is to dictate how to administer justice, right, in sentencing and all of that. But the fact that, like, for example, this judge chose to administer a lighter sentence in this case, which goes back to, that level of bias that we're seeing coming from the bench. And we just aren't putting enough focus on the fact that these judges have such a big influence, that they are the ones essentially making the decisions on how these cases go. And so I think that is, we just can't forget about that. We just can't forget about that. Dante Wright's mom, Katie Wright, she went on record to say that today, quote, this is her quote, today the justice system murdered Dante all over again. This isn't okay. This is the problem with our justice system today. White women tears trumps justice. I'm just, to see that in 2022, we're still at this place. How can you not think about what has happened to, like Medgar Evers, and see how that cycle, that horrific tradition continues to happen? That if a white woman says that she is in fear of her life, and we've seen this with the number of incidences where white women use the phone and to call the police on black men who aren't doing anything. And we're seeing this constantly. And I think one of my big things is like, is there a time that we're going to get past this, Bakari? Are we really, really going to get past this?
To be honest, Farajii, I'm not sure. I think I have to remain hopeful that we will, which is why, in my opening comments, I made mention of restorative justice. I think that we are at a point now where I think we also have to look outside of just some of the traditional justice structure that we are accustomed to. And I think, that will mean a lot of adjustments, a lot of slow moving conversations, which a lot of us do not want to have. So
yeah, I would agree with you there. A lot of slow moving conversation. I definitely would agree with you there. Look, I'm gonna take a quick pause. When we come back, we're gonna just play a little bit. We're gonna play what was said in court today from Kim Potter, her tearful, quote unquote, tearful apology. So we're gonna have that when we come right back. Stay with us, folks. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for a Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for a Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show here on The Culture on the Black Star Network. We're going to make sure that we just getting some things straightened out here. So, folks, we've been talking about this latest situation around Kim Potter. This is the former Minnesota police officer that had killed Daunte Wright. And we want to play for you just a little bit of what was said at today's sentencing hearing. Check this out.
Given all these considerations and having carefully considered the comments of the family of both Daunte Wright and the comments of Kimberly Potter, as well as the arguments of counsel, it is the sentence and judgment of this court that you shall be committed to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 24 months. You shall serve 2/3 of that time, or 16 months in prison, and 1/3 on supervised release, assuming no disciplinary offenses or conditional release violations. You have credit for 58 days already served. Restitution will be reserved. There'll be a fine of $1,000 and a surcharge of $78 to be taken out of prison wages or due within 180 days. You must provide a DNA sample. You may not use or possess any firearms, ammunition, or explosives. You have the right to appeal the conviction and sentence. If you are unable to pay the cost of an appeal, You may apply for leave to appeal at state expense by contacting the state public defender. You may be seated, Ms. Potter. I'd like to make a few parting comments. I recognize there will be those who disagree with the sentence. That I granted a significant downward departure does not in any way diminish Daunte Wright's life. His life mattered. And to those who disagree and feel a longer prison sentence is appropriate, as difficult as it may be, please try to empathize with Ms. Potter's situation. As President Barack Obama once said, learning to stand in somebody else's shoes, to see through their eyes, that's how peace begins. And it's up to you to make that happen. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Folks, that was Judge Chu as she read the sentencing of Kim Potter, who killed Daunte Wright while in the line of duty. Bakari Chikwaya, I am disturbed by that one.
You have to excuse my body language because I was really having a moment. I didn't hear the latter invocation of the Barack Obama quote when I watched the segment of the ruling earlier. And it just invokes in me, again, so much frustration. And I am a bit speechless, so you may want to come back to me. But when I see the invocation of Black leaders, when there is something evidently done wrong to a Black person,
yep,
it is a reminder that at every turn and point in history where there has been injustice done unto a Black individual or unto the Black community, it's been incumbent upon us to be understanding, to be empathetic, to put ourselves in someone else's shoes as if our shoes are not run down ragged and torn, and we don't need to feel what are our shoes. It's not okay to feel what we're feeling. We have to extend our feelings to others. And it's, to the point I think Bakari made earlier, where clearly implied by the body language of Potter and her defense attorneys, I want to assume they anticipated this sort of ruling and sentencing, especially because they petitioned for a shorter prison sentence, and not even prison and probation, because of her wonderful record and evident contrition, I think was the term they used, because she feels bad. That's enough that I can say for now.
Yeah.
It just leaves you speechless.
I would have to agree, Shaquaya. Bakari.
It's offensive.
It's thank you. It's very offensive.
It's offensive, right?
When Barack Obama did not say that
in that context,
in this context,
mm-hmm.
like you can't So one of our followers on Facebook, one of our watchers on Facebook, Janelle, she said, quoting Obama out of context is now as popular as quoting MLK Jr. Like, you can't do that. You can't talk about empathy and I know what the next step is. You know it, and I know it, Shaquay and Bakari. You talk about empathy at the court. You talk about forgiveness as soon as she walks out of court.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't talk about that. I think Judge Chu was absolutely wrong in invoking that sentiment during this sentencing. That is absolutely wrong. That right there just speaks to bias.
Oh, and just no taste.
The irony of that, right? Just that not being empathetic, right? Because in order for you to use that, and please forgive my laughing and my smiling. This is not a joke to me, but it's one of those things that's so infuriating that on some level it's kind of like that's my reaction. Like you have to be joking, you know. Surely you jest. And so for me, it's. I think it's ironic for her to have used that quote, and I think what you were just mentioning, Farajii, in terms of using Martin Luther King's name essentially in vain, right? If we just want to spell it out, it's like you're using the name in vain. You're evoking the name in vain, and I think it's offensive. And I just don't think it's appropriate, right? That was not the context that that quote was said within. So, and I think that to use it, you could have used a quote about empathy from so many other people. I'm sure even if you wanted to just narrow it down to other presidents that may have said things about empathy, but to attempt to leverage Barack Obama's, it's offensive. It's offensive.
And you use, and we all know Barack Obama, whether you agree with his politics or not, he still holds a high, the Black community, we hold him and Michelle Obama in a high regard, right? So anything now, it's, back to what one of our watchers, Janelle, said, like, we put him on the pedestal. I remember seeing faces of his face next to Dr. King's face when he was running for office. So we have already put him on this high level, this high pedestal. Again, because we like him as a human being, not necessarily, you may not agree with his politics, but we like him and what he represents and what his family represents. All that to say, to have a to have that as part of the sentencing, I mean, just to ask people for empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Ask people for empathy. I'm blown away. Now look, if Dante Wright had gotten out the car and started whipping her ass, and he started beating on her real bad, and in the course of that, she was able to get the pistol and she fatally shoots him. Okay, I could be like, okay, I see that she was in a place of self-defense. But it was her and other police officers. That young man he was no threat. He was no threat. So why are you asking us for empathy when he wasn't the threat? She was the threat. And now you asking us to be empathetic about her because she feels, quote unquote, hurt. She shed some tears in court.
Let's be clear.
I don't get it.
I want us to be clear on something. The psychological aspect of her using a Barack Obama quote, it's very clear who she's speaking to, right? She's not speaking to outraged citizens en masse generally. She knows she's speaking to individuals who would associate or empathize with the situation because of Dante's race. And the context upon which he was pulled over with from the first just really looking at the bones of this situation. They pulled him over because he used the wrong lights in the wrong turn lane. They claimed his tags were expired, even though his mother still to this day says that the tags were not expired. And because he had something in his rearview mirror, an air freshener. When they pulled him over and ran his name, they learned that he had a weapons violation and I think a restraining order against him. The grounds upon which was enough to arrest him. Oftentimes, when police officers are pulling over individuals of color, they expect, or by statistical context of how, low level or nonviolent crimes are impended upon people of color, especially those in poverty. There's oftentimes an expectation that they can get somebody for something. And I'm not trying to create or speak around this shadowy sense of how individual officers act. This is the system.
Yeah.
And this situation and how it played out, notwithstanding your scenario, right, where there may have been a threat imposed upon police in which they can invoke the clause of all due means of needing to defend themselves, and the clause that gets them out of trouble all the time. You had a situation where she made a mistake. A training police officer who has been in authority for decades at this point made a mistake and pulled a gun instead of a taser. I don't personally believe that it may have been a mistake. I believe perhaps it was first nature to feel as if her life was in danger because Dante was Black, and she pulled a gun, but then realized immediately upon it happening, because of the ruling of the George Floyd case taking place that day, it had to be on the forefront of all officers' minds that day. Derek Chauvin was in court to have his sentence ruled that day.
Mm-hmm.
So when she pulled the trigger and realized that she shot him, her first and immediate concern was not for him, it was for her. And that, again, is why this is so disturbing. The judge interpreting the law to decrease the proposed sentencing so drastically, and then turning around and asking very explicitly the Black community to put ourselves in her shoes.
Come on, man.
And be understanding. It's not our job to. It was her job to know not to pull a gun. It's not our job to be understanding. And the more and more that it is an expectation for us to be understanding, the more we erupt at the seams in our communities of when something happens. And then when the Baltimore Freddie Grays, when these situations happen, when you see chaos and anger, it again is incumbent upon us to remain calm. It's a cycle of blasphemic justice. Injustice, should I say. It is a cycle of blasphemic injustice. It's sick. And Bakari.
I think to just like do the quick math, as they say, and to recognize that she wasn't even sentenced for 10% of the number of years that she could have received. And again, as I said, I don't know what that number of years would look like, because I don't think that there's
it was well in the 20s though, right? It was at least 20.
But the max would have been, it was 15 for first degree and 6 to 8.5. So even if we go on the lower end and just use 6 years as opposed to 8.5, you're talking about a minimum then in that case of 21 years. And she got 2. So we're not even at 2 years and 2 months. We're at literally 9, maybe 9.5%, not even 10% of the years that she could have received. So it's a slap in the face. And I'm cautious to use the word hope, but I think that if we can hope for anything productive to come out of these types of conversations that we are repeatedly inundated with. One is to be able to take refuge and to take a step away from the amount of trauma that we are ingesting by looking at not only just the killings, but also the sort of replay, the emotional trauma and psychological trauma that we had to experience by sitting through, and listening to the sentences.
Yeah.
There's also how do we, again, how do we challenge ourselves more within our own communities? And I don't want to go back to the restorative justice piece, but it does also in a lot of ways look like, what does that look like for us to determine what that justice is going to look like on the front end? So,
and I think that when you break it down like that, Bakari, and when you're talking about the number of years that she could have potentially gotten, and I think that we need to really look at that. The number of years she could have potentially got versus the one that she actually did get.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that just leaves a more bitter taste in your mouth. It then is not just a slap in the face; it's a kick in the gut. It's almost as if that she really didn't get penalized at all. You know what I mean? For something, when you're talking about 20-something years. Say it again.
I said, especially when a portion of that is going to be spent on probation. And I don't want to minimize the experience of probation, right? But then there's also in the article, right? It also shares that she's also not within the general prison population. And I don't want to, wish harm upon anyone, but even to know that this person is outside of the typical or the standard prison experience, right? That so many other, especially Black and brown women, if they were in the same position, probably would find themselves within, right? That she still is the exception to exception to the exception to the exception in so many ways.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And then, our watchers are bringing up the case of Amber Geiger, who mistakenly thought that someone was in her apartment because she didn't remember her damn apartment where she lived, and she wound up, shooting and killing Botham Jean, and how the judge extended a high level of biased compassion by walking off the judge's platform and giving her a hug and all of that. And it's just this again, that's what this moment reeks of. It reeks of a high level of bias that should lead to Judge Chu just getting disbarred. I mean, seriously. Like, I'm really case.
So now what I'm interested in doing, just on a personal level, to appease my interest in knowing the judicial record of Judge Chu, I want to go look at her average sentencing for similar crimes, for first degree and second degree manslaughter, where if there are other instances, I'm sure not, whether they're infamous or not, involving law enforcement officers and not involving law enforcement officers. I'm also interested in knowing what her sentencing in average looks for non-violent crimes for individuals of color, because now I want to get to the core of what the basis of her reasoning may be on a personal level, what her record shows. I'm thinking of Pamela Moses, and I'll be clear, I don't like to often just throw out different cases that are not necessarily connected by crime type or by state jurisdiction, because we know laws vary in each state and each case is different by its terms. But I mean, on the face of just thinking about the judicial system, I'm thinking of Pamela Moses right now, who last month was sentenced to 6 years in prison for trying to vote because he was a felon and her probation officer told her she could, walked her through the steps, and she got 6 years in prison.
And she didn't kill nobody.
These situations just, again, exasperate. It is an exasperating evidence of, and that's not a term, but it exasperates the sick case of the judicial system. It is deafening. It is numbing. It is something worthy of us really trying to consider what the strategy is for influencing and creating really sustainable pipelines into law and legal and judicial systems and law enforcement systems for people of color. I think I oftentimes hold myself accountable to wanting to play more of a role in where these things are taking place, and wanting to become more informed about the situational aspects of individuals who are running for judicial offices. Oftentimes, most people don't pay attention to the judges on their ballots when it comes to local and state elections. And I hope that this is a reminder for people that you absolutely have to pay attention to who's sitting on the bench, right? It matters whether it's a famous case or whether it's Paul down the street. The background of these individuals matter so significantly to what happens when bad goes wrong, when things go wrong, when bad happens.
Yeah. And I mean, and I'm wondering, Bakari, you know, as we, you know, have all experienced this moment, I'm wondering from an activist organizer's point of view, Shaquia has been talking about checking the, you know, let's look at the history. Let's look at how the, you know, let's get people more informed about who these judges are that to sit on these benches. But, you know, what would you recommend that folks do to get themselves engaged? And I mean, we may not be able to prevent the next Dante Wright incident because, you know, we might not be there. But I think our response to this is in our control. So what would you recommend? How do we move forward? And I'm not talking about forward like forgetting, but forward like using this as a point of reference for the next step of the movement.
I think that, you know, in a lot of ways, I think it looks like finding ways to be engaged locally. Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, which is here in Baltimore, they created a I want to, please forgive me, I don't want to completely butcher it, but I believe it's like a legislative scorecard. And I think that we are in a position now where we have access to so much information, but to be honest, we don't have, I believe that we don't have the full capacity intentionally to fully digest that information. So I think that we are able to, one, support financially, right? Becoming sustainers of organizations like LBS, to be able to support and fund their work, to be able to create tools for us to use and to leverage. Because I think, right, to Shakoi's point, we need to do the research. We need to know the ins and outs of each of these judges, but who among us will have the capacity, right? Collectively, we could do the work and strategize. I don't know if that looks like an app where we're able to swipe like you would on a dating profile that's, you know, right or left, whether they're in or out, so that we know and we are understood about how they stack up, how they line up. But I think that we are in a stage now where I think it's one thing to have the information, but I think we need vehicles and organizations that are community based, that are going to help us distill and just digest some of that information into pieces that we can take into small bite-sized chunks. It's completely and totally overwhelming from an individual standpoint. So that's my thought. I think that in a lot of ways, LBS has already created the model. How do we continue to just like expand upon that and use it in other ways?
So I'm sure that there are other think tanks that are present in cities across the country where folks can start to tap into, you know, showing their support, Bakari, as well as, you know, just using those platforms as, you know, places to start your level of engagement. And I want to let our people know, those who are watching and from all of the different spaces that we're on, that it doesn't have to stop here. It doesn't mean that just because the sentence was read that the fight is over. We can still fight for Dante Wright's life, even though this sentence was given. There is an opportunity for us to change this type of injustice, whether it's dealing with the judges, whether it's getting involved in making sure that our people understand their rights when they are approached by police. I know that locally, the NAACP, the local chapter, and others were putting out little cards of things to do when you're pulled over by the police, how to respond. whether it's just being knowledgeable of these situations and being informed enough to have very deep, well thought out conversations that's going to lead to people feeling like, you know what, I do have some power. We don't have to accept that just because a life was taken, that it's over for all of us. We don't have to accept that. And there are a number, Shaquaya and Bakari, y'all both know, there's a huge number of cases that are still open that still haven't gotten the national spotlight, as this case has, of police brutality that exists. I mean, I started reading cases from 2019. So, and I'm sure that everyone that's watching has heard about a police brutality case in their city or their town. I'm sure you have. So we don't have to, this case does not have to be one where it's just in vain. We have to become vigilant about this. And then on the other side of it, Shaquaya, as we wrap up this part of the conversation, we got to put the fire on the asses of, I always say, put the fire on the gas and put our foot on the gas of those who are in the political space. Because if this right here doesn't revitalize the conversation in Congress about pushing forward the George Floyd Justice for Policing Act, I don't know what will. That's the place that we're in. Then we got to look at the FOP. You talked about it, Shaquaya, the Fraternal Order of Police. Every FOP, every police union has to take accountability, has to start the process. But we got to put as a constituency. They represent the police officers, but who is going to represent us? We are treated unjustly by these police officers because they're only going to worry about the police officers. So we still have work to do, Shaquaya. What's your final thought on that?
We indeed have much work to do, Farajii. I think what really is important in the context of all of the national cases of police brutality that have really impacted the general psyche of the average American citizen. I set aside, I guess, the general population because these things have always been on the forefront of my mind, in that I'm a part of this community and have experienced police brutality myself on various occasions. But I think clearly the cases of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, though it was not police involved, just the treatment of individuals of color when it comes to interfacing white individuals in uniforms or without, and how there is a sense of danger assumed to be had when that interaction takes place. I think the first thing on my mind when I think of these cases is the unified nature upon which individuals are trained and informed, as Bakari raised up, and you raised up, the NAACP passing out informational cards on what to do, steps to take when you are stopped by the police, because oftentimes there's a paralysis of fear that takes place, or there's an impulsive action that may happen because of the psychological distress that takes place when you're stopped by police. I think there needs to be another attempt at, community trainings and how to handle that. But there's also the political alignment of groups that can hold accountable the different institutions associated with law enforcement officers and political branches in advocating and sitting at the table for change. Speaking of LBS, and I'm going to stop here, but just as an example, there has been in years past, an effort to reform the Baltimore City Police Department. There's been an effort across this country to reform police departments where there are civilian review boards, and when there's a counterpart to these public agencies to actually have community members involved in holding individuals accountable as to the statutes, the training, everything that is enveloped into the process of how that agency is ran and how people are held accountable and who work for it. I just would love to continue to see that type of progression made on a local level. But again, when we talk about our political leaders being able to speak to these issues, they need to be able to speak to it clearly and boldly. And that's not what happens. That's not what we see happening in Washington, D.C. right now.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Folks, we're going to take a quick pause right here, and I appreciate you both, Bakari and Shaquaya, for speaking on this. We're going to take a pause. When we come back, let's have an author chat with Majora Carter as she puts out a new book, Reclaiming Our Community, talking about the issue of gentrification and displacement. And we're going to have another important conversation around that. So stay with us. A lot to come at you on the second hour of The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. We'll be right back.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Majora Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Folks, welcome back to the show here on the Black Star Network. Very, very excited to have this next conversation, which is a conversation I think that it speaks to where we are in this country, because as much as we have been discussing political issues, we've been discussing, economic issues, we haven't placed a lot of emphasis recently on the fact that there are a number of neighborhoods that are changing. And not just changing in a sense of, you have somebody moving in and somebody moving out. It's changing dramatically to the point where we're seeing that the history, the culture, the things that make those neighborhoods so great and so special have changed. And we're also seeing that there are a number of efforts across the country, here in Baltimore and other places across the country, where people are becoming and neighborhoods are becoming, just expendable, just being used and being decided upon by developers and other stakeholders that want to change the dynamics of communities and neighborhoods and essentially history. Here to give us a little bit more insight about what we can do to keep our neighborhoods, to keep our communities, the integrity, the history, the authenticity of the community intact, is author Majora Carter. She has a book called Reclaiming Your Community. And I want to welcome her to the airwaves of the Black Star Network here on The Culture. Majora, thank you so much for joining us. How are you this afternoon? Oh, you on? We got you on mute. I think you're on mute. There we go. It's all right. There we go. Majora, thank you so much for joining us. How are you this afternoon?
I'm amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Majora, let's talk a little bit about this this work that you have put out, and of course the issues around it. In a few moments, I'm gonna bring back my culture crew, Bakari and Shaquaya. But you wrote this book, and it's a powerful book, Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. That's pretty straightforward there.
Yeah, exactly. The title says it all.
Right. And what was the inspiration for this? What was the impetus of you writing this piece of work?
Really, so first of all, I'm from the South Bronx, born and bred, still live here, and I grew up during the literally the burning Bronx, like when landlords were torching their buildings. My neighbor was on the nightly news, where folks were looking at this place as like literally the poster child for urban blight, something that I never forgot. But as a bright kid, I was one of the ones that was led to believe that you will measure success by how far you get away from our communities. And I obviously was not the only one. And there are communities like ours all across the country. And so this book was written literally as a way to respond, to the idea that like our communities, that, we need to move out of our neighborhoods to live in better ones. And we want to challenge that through what we call a talent retention approach to community development, which is literally about acknowledging that reclaiming our community involves retaining the talent that was born and raised there, that's already there, in order to improve our surroundings and our own economic future. It is very different from gentrification, which literally involves, outsiders coming in to change the community for their own purposes and to suit their own needs.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we're saying that when you're talking about reclaiming it, words matter. And we're in a time where we are hearing people say, we want to get this back. Like, for example, we want to take our country back. When you're talking about reclaiming, is it a reclaiming in the spirit and in the sense of, hey, you're not allowed? Or is it reclaiming saying, look, I was here first and you are certainly welcome to be here, but you're going to respect the history and you're going to respect the members of this community when you get here?
It is the exactly that. Because right now, when we say reclaiming your community, it involves the fact that recognizing that there's always been value in our communities, but it also acknowledges the fact that we often don't see the value in it, but while we're there. And for example, people like to think that, or often will say that, oh my goodness, a neighborhood's changing when you start to see things like doggy daycares or cute cafes in our communities, right? But gentrification actually starts to happen long before that. It starts to happen when we, as community members, believe that there's no value in our community, as evidenced by the fact that so many of us will sell early and cheap to what we now know are predatory speculators that know there's value in our community and are banking on the fact that we don't know it. And that's why we've seen, so like in my own neighborhood here in Hunts Point in the South Bronx, we've watched, we've unfortunately seen the fact that our home ownership rate has dropped over the past 20 years down to less than 7%. Almost all of those sales, have been cash sales, closing really quickly, like often within a week, by predatory speculators and the holding companies that they represent, essentially separating, people from our community from the wealth that home ownership can create for their families for generations. And I could say that in full authority because my family was one of them. Unfortunately, I'm the youngest of 10, or not. Unfortunately, I'm the youngest of 10. I'm happy to be honest. But I'm of a family of 10 kids, right. And my dad bought our house, back and I talk about this in my book. My dad bought our house in the late 1940s. Here he was, a Black man, a Pullman porter who couldn't get a loan, right? So for $15,000, he won that in a racetrack. plunked it down on the house that literally raised us all. But the second, when both my parents passed away, I could not convince my siblings to hold on to that asset to pass down, because they were just like, it's cute what you do, Majora. You do this community thing, but but that neighborhood, nah, this is the place, for me. It's like, we should be happy anybody wants it. It was kind of like that. And so my family is not alone in that.
So I'm wondering, Majora, first and foremost, how long ago was it since that your parents' house, how long ago since your past?
It was sold back in 2005. Yeah.
2005.
2005. And of course, now that house is now worth 3 times what it was sold for.
That's what I was getting to.
Yes.
That's what I was getting to. That a lot of times, and this is no shade on your brothers or your sisters and your family, but a lot of times we just don't have that long-term vision to say, hey, if we buy, since we invested in this property, this is a hot area in the city, I think we need to hold on to this.
Well, to be fair, it wasn't a hot area, right? At the time, it was definitely not. And we're still like on that trajectory. But and seriously, it's like, my family's not unique. But what we're dealing with, is the fact that we don't see value in our communities. And so many of us are not led to believe that there is. When I think about, the nonprofit industrial complex, and that so much of it is in, what we call low status communities, not because they're people that are in them have are horrible and of a low status. It's more like inequality is simply assumed both inside and outside of the community by people who live in it and people who are looking in on it. And because of that, we tend to devalue everything that's in it. It's one of the reasons why we like to, if we so quote unquote make it, it means we make it out of our neighborhoods, and we are
into somebody else's neighborhood.
Exactly. And it's just sort of like, why do we keep doing that? I think we can definitely talk about the history of the legacy of white supremacy and how it impacts us. And we start thinking that nothing associated with us is all that great. And that's real. But that's why the act of reclaiming your own community is so important right now, because we need to recognize that this is something that is within the ability for us to do. But first, we've got to have the mindset that this is something that we should be doing.
And I think the other part about that is you bring it up in your book, creating a culture of reinvestment from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
Like
yes.
that you want people to see the value of where they are, not just on the inside of them as a person, but just on the inside of us as a community, to take a step back and say, wait a minute, there is some gold under, there are some diamonds underneath this pile of coal right now. We just need to mine it. And I'm wondering, how do we start to mine that first in the thinking of people to see the value of who they are and where they are, before we even start talking about let's moving out? How do you unmine those diamonds?
I got my start in community development as an environmental justice activist, right? We were struggling against waste facilities and power plants constantly being put in our communities. And one thing that I realized early on when I got started is that there are people in our communities are really kind of dejected about the fate and the state of their communities. So you've got to give them something to look forward to. And it was one of the reasons why I focused on project-based development. I was like, look, we got to build something, for people to see. And it doesn't have to be huge all the time, but it has to remind people that there's a future that we can create. And so one of my first projects was actually literally transforming a dump into what is now a national award-winning park. It went through many iterations, and now it's really amazing, and it's won national awards. But it started out as just could we just clean up the trash here and get to the river from the entrance? But really, it is about showing people that there's other people like them in their community too, and that there's something to look forward to. Because what we did was we found out where people were spending their money and where they were spending their time, and it was usually outside of the community. So one of the things that we worked on building first was actually a cafe. because we knew people were leaving to like be cool and cute at cafes that had programming, things like, open mics or just like, DJs or whatever. And so we built that and called it the Boogie Down Grind Cafe. And, as an homage to hip hop, but basically it became a space where people would do things like, open mics or art exhibits or, credit repair workshops. I mean, we just gave people an opportunity to see themselves in a place with other folks that were doing cool things. And it was often the first time that people had even an opportunity to even think about like, wait, there's cool people in my neighborhood, because most of them leave and they often are not connected with the same people in their community. Right. So creating those spaces so that you can do community in your community and feel good about it is the first thing. And I think another thing is, for people that are, I talked about home ownership before, and, because as we all know, that wealth gap is, what comes between white families, Black families, and, white families and Latino ones, et cetera. But the bottom line is, it's like, first of all, we have got to like hold on to what we got. Because even, especially if a family owns a multifamily house, then they need to be real good about, then that's an entrepreneur, that's a business as well. Yep. They're also providing an opportunity for, affordable housing on their own. But again, keeping it within the family, keeping it within the community and those assets.
Absolutely. Folks, we're going to take a quick pause. When we come back, more conversation with author Majora Carter about her book, Reclaiming Your Community. We'll also bring in the culture crew in this discussion and a whole lot more. So stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back. We have been talking to author Majora Carter, the author of the book Reclaiming Your Community. As she's been talking about how do we make sure that we don't have to move out of our neighborhood to live in a better one. We've been having very, very good conversation about it. And let me just say this, folks. There are a lot of elements of this discussion that we can touch on. And I'm seeing people checking in on our chats. They're saying, look, what about this? What about that? There are certainly a lot of elements, and we want to make sure that we try to bring in as many of these elements to this particular conversation as well. So, Majora, again, thank you so much for joining us here on the Black Star Network.
My pleasure. Thanks.
I want to bring in my culture crew, Shaquaya McKenzie and Bakari Jones. Shaquaya McKenzie is an activist, an educator. Bakari is an educator, is an activist as well when working within the LGBTQIA community. Shaquaya, what are your questions or your thoughts for Majora Carter here?
First, I want to say thank you, Majora. I'd not heard of you prior to this, and I just ordered your book on Amazon, and
Boom.
I am to be a fervent supporter of anything you do moving forward because you are a very clear-headed and clear-voiced advocate in this space, and it's refreshing for me to interact with you now, and that we're going to get ready to talk to get to each other, but in general to hear you speak to the most common sense approaches to revitalization in our communities. Something that I've always since learning about essentially the deterring aspects of what had become characteristics of urban communities, which was namely created by redlining and disinvestment, or not enough investment or divestment of our communities through the late 20th, early 21st century, is how do we make it better, right? How do we build back from within when we've been stripped and or limited of resources that we need to build back? And I think that I'm extremely intrigued by all that you said. It makes a lot of sense. I just wonder if more people are like me, where we're constantly reeling on what wrong had been done and not thinking about how we could build within. We have really dynamic and innovative leaders in Baltimore City doing some great things right now as it relates to real estate development, or in general, just fighting plight and abandonment. But I wonder how, or my question for you is, do you think that what you're doing in the South Bronx is a replicable model for other urban cities, or that each urban city kind of has to examine specifically the history and the slated nature of what has been limited resources in the community to create, essentially SWAT and create a plan? Or can we just do what you're doing? Or is it a
good question?
That's
a question.
Excellent question. And that is exactly why I wrote this book, because we may have different communities, honestly, but literally the issues that you talked about, from redlining, it's just like the impacts of 400 years, of a very selective way that low status communities were dealt with, and then you layer on top of that systemic racism. Yeah, it's honey, it's the South Bronx, it's in Baltimore, it's Oakland, it's everywhere. It's honestly even in the hollows of West Virginia and poor white coal mining towns. It's like this is the Native American reservations, you name it. As long as it's low status and in those places where inequality is assumed, it's assumed, and it's treated that way by the nonprofit industrial complex, by our government, and there are people who will benefit from it, but it's never the people in those communities.
Correct.
Ever. So yes, in short, it can happen. And because I want to, because what's clear about this is it's the talent retention strategy, and it is an acknowledgement that we have always had incredible folks, absolutely capable of leading, the charge and supporting their communities to invest emotionally and financially and spiritually, so that the benefits actually circulate throughout the economic, spiritual, and emotional economy of a space. So the kind of triage that needs to happen is, one, people need to understand that their communities have value. because just because we don't see it, because we've been led to believe that we don't, that it's not there, at least while we're in it, that the others do. And that's why the neighborhoods change the way they do. And the talent retention, approach that we're taking, is just an acknowledgement that the folks there already have the tools. So yes, do we need to deal with the fact that there has been this historic, truly historic way to separate, in particular, people of color and Black folks, from the redevelopment of their own communities? Yes. But I think now since we can say that, we need to continue to talk about it and not just be like, we just need, the nonprofit industrial complex to support, make building affordable rental housing, which we know is only lasts as long as the subsidies do.
Correct.
But that's it. And it's not creating any kind of wealth for the people in those communities. It's just waiting for the next wave of really kind of landless and transient people to fill that void again. And so what we need to do is really like put ourselves in the position of being like, you know what, I am a developer. I started calling myself a developer before I did anything, because it was just like, because no one's going to do it for me.
Yep.
Because I don't think that talent retention is like the be all end all of like support dealing with our communities. And I don't think it's going to solve gentrification 100%. But I know that without talent retention as a community development strategy, then the gentrification cannot be solved without it, because it's got to come from the inside out, at least a portion of it.
Yeah, you're dead on. You're spot on. And I'd like to, I don't know if you agree with this, but I'd like to believe, or as I've said in different instances, Farajii, I don't know if you've heard me say this before, but poor communities were created. They didn't just happen.
Yes, absolutely.
And the circumvention of understanding how that came to be is the osmosis for understanding how it can be undone, right? So I appreciate your insights on this, your work on this, not just your insights, but your work. Thank you for working, sis. Thank you for seeing this, for being able to innovatively think within the box. And I hope that there is I'm sure that you've been doing work to collaborate with individuals around the country, but now my wheels are spinning about the people I know in Baltimore and how we can connect you and how we can have a round table on what's going on with the necessary people. So I really look forward to being connected with you, learning from you, reading your book. Yeah, I'm excited for what's to come. When exactly, can I ask, when exactly did your development work start with the park in your community? And when did that take place? And then has it been a domino effect of being able, since you can prove, your work in a model, that you've had access or you've been able to make relationships with individuals to make more things possible? Kind of what has been the timeline of your work development and what's on the frontier for you now?
Yeah, so I've only been working in the field probably since the late 1990s. And, and it did start, again, I was an environmental justice activist. The park creation was literally just to sort of show a different picture of the beauty of our community so that people could actually relate to it and feel like it was something to fight for. So I wouldn't consider that like my path as a real estate developer, but what it did do when I realized that it was people needed desperately to have reasons to want to fight for their communities. Right. That's really what it showed me. And then the more I became aware of that, it was also about real estate community, because I realized that they're like watching the way that the path toward gentrification was happening in my own community, and realizing that the value that we already put here was literally going outside of the community. And it was just like, but why? I mean, this just doesn't make any sense. Like the community, literally, like from the topography to the beautiful, like the houses that are in here, they're lovely. So, but why is it when we're here, they're not all that great?
Wow.
Why do people not place value on them now? And so, to your other question about what are we working on now? So first of all, it's like I also just want to say that this kind of stuff is happening, in other parts of the country, and I actually do, raise in my book, totally pay homage to like a few parts of the country where I'm seeing this happen. And just there's some sample stories. One is in Oakland, East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, where there's a group in East Bay in Oakland that's working that's buying like a portion of a block, to reactivate this place called on 7th Street, to reactivate, with this like real musical legacy of this area. It was just sort of like that street in Oakland where everybody and everybody's mother played. And it's just, and it fell into disrepair, and the community is actually buying it back and doing the redevelopment. It's amazing. So I'm so excited, about that kind of stuff. But as far as like the kind of things we're working on, we talk about this in the book too. And so we bought a little piece of land, or acquired actually an old rail station that was the reason why my family is here, and because my dad was a Pullman porter, and he, then they were hoping to apparently the railroad company was planning on reactivating rail service through that station, and my dad was like, "Oh, that's my line," so that's why he bought the house that he did, because he wanted to be able to walk to his line. Didn't reopen, but that's okay. But now his baby daughter bought this, acquired this building, the old rail station, and we're transforming that into an event hall. And we're also using the changes in the National Security and Exchange Commission, which didn't allow for small investors to invest in real estate development projects. They can now for the same rate of return as large investors. So we're opening that up and building out the opportunity for people within our own community to actually invest in economic developments that are here.
That's awesome. I want to bring Bakari. I want to give you an opportunity to pose your question for Majora Carter. What's your question on you? What are your thoughts?
Oh, thank you, Majora. Just one for, again, as Shaquille said, thank you for writing this book, and thank you for sharing space with us today. You have my brain just buzzing all over the place. So I'm excited to have this conversation. One of the questions that I have, I think, and I'm sure I'm going to be able to read it in the book as well, but I guess my question for folks that are listening in, and just for myself as selfishly as well, how would you describe, and I know it will be different in every city, but as best you can you give us a little bit of an idea of the profile of the types of folks that are a good fit for this type of work? That's one. So like the actual profile, and then how many folks you feel like are really needed, I think, to start getting some traction when you do this work. When you mentioned doing the park, in my mind, I'm imagining, is that just you? Did you go, did you get a collective of people? What does that look like? I think there are people, not just in Baltimore, but that are all over the country that I can imagine that ride past a block or live on a block currently where they want to be able to impact that change. They see the value, even if it's just sentimental. Maybe it doesn't have the markers of gentrification yet. They understand the value, but they're not clear about the amount of capital that's required, whether it's, the cash or the sweat equity that it's going to take to start making some of this change. So if you can, I would love to hear you just kind of speak to sort of what it takes, whether it's like just the actual dollars that are required to start moving the needle in this type of work, the time commitment, just what does that look like to start being more engaged?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sort of expanding the idea of what capital can be, because it's not always money. Sometimes it's like, the influencers, in a community just deciding that this is an idea that needs to happen. And then capital will follow. Yep. But, it really is about, like, is this the passion that people have to see change in their own communities? And to be quite honest, literally when I first started with that park, I maybe had like 5 people who were interested in seeing this, because there were so many other problems, that even most of the social justice organizations were just like really, not like education, and you're talking about building a park, really? We got to stick a stake in the ground. We got to show that our land could be used for something else. And they were like, you go do that. And I did. And then they were just like, and then it was their idea, and that's good. I'll be straight up. So they just chose not to bother me, which was wonderful. But what you want to do is like, recognize that, not everybody's going to become a developer, and that's fine. But when people do, when they decide to like open up a business, in the community, people can patronize them, right? They can recognize that this is a part that the cyclical support of people in our own community by people in our own community. That's a really important step to take as well, because not everybody's going to be like in everything all the time, and we shouldn't expect it. But we can create, the kind of, I think the longing to see us all succeed if we put it out there. And I'm telling you, when I was opening up the cafe, again, it wasn't like, a huge popular success when it first started. This wasn't, but in part because people hadn't even seen a cafe in our community since I was in high school in the 1980s. Like we just didn't have places like that. And so to see it was almost kind of like, what is it doing here? And who did it? And, why is it here? And there was a lot, in some cases, folks were just like, it must be like some white people, who put this thing there. And it was just like, no, it's just Majora from around the corner. Like this is like locally owned. And but now it's the kind of thing where people have discovered that, they're not alone. And I think that's the real sense that we're trying to bring with this, and trying to use this book as a way for our communities to have conversations about like, what do we want in our community? Why do we think that we've got to move in order to live in a better one? Can I keep my family's house? Can I consider that? Whereas before, a lot of people weren't even thinking about it.
Right.
And now we literally just conversations that we hear in my own neighborhood. Like I'm seeing the impact of that. And I am so grateful. And I honestly feel so blessed that I can literally point to things that have happened. People who, because of the example that we put out there, folks are like, I can start a business here. I can start a business, period. And which makes me really happy. And just like, I'm going to stay in my family's house. Can I just share a beautiful story with you that came out?
No, Majora, you can't. No, you can't share no story.
But as a result, I gave this book to, rather someone bought the book and they saw it, read it, and they were just like, and this woman, out in Jersey had literally gotten into that, that 3-day period before you sell your property. It's a grace period so that you can, and either buyer or seller can stop the sale. And so she was in that period. She had read my book in one sitting and was just like, what am I doing? Like, I'm literally selling my child's inheritance.
Wow.
And
Majora.
Yeah. And decided.
I got a question about that. And I think that speaks first and foremost. I mean, people are just so excited about what what you're bringing to this conversation, especially about, ownership. I think that inheritance piece is critical, right? Yes. Because we're in a space where like you said, when you say you made it, that means you made it out. You running far away from your roots, even though you say, oh no, it's in my heart. It's not on your bank. It's not on your land. It's those things. So I think that it's important that we still emphasize the importance of owning property where, we grew up in, or where we came from, because most likely that property is not just going to go up in value financially, but it's something to pass on to the next generation within our families.
Yes.
And our great grandparents, they understood that. Mm-hmm. They did understand that. Somewhere along the line, we decided, we chose not to continue that tradition. But I do have a question in regards to community land trust. We've had a number of folks in our chat that have brought that up and say, hey, what about community land trust? Where does that fall in this whole conversation?
I'm not an expert on community land trust per se.
Okay.
It's one of the reasons, and I think frankly, in the way that they've often been used in communities like mine, it's usually for a community purpose, and it's not like the land, or it actually has equity that's going, or excuse me, that there are even homes on top of it, so that the equity can be built up for people within that area, so that they're actually building equity too. But that's why I really love the idea of the permanent real estate cooperative out in Oakland, because that's exactly what they're doing. Like, they're taking the best parts of community land trusts and building it out. But I think we should also, I'm not throwing any baby out with the bathwater at all. So we should really explore all of those things. But I think also in particular, look at different ways to build equity in our family so that we can pass that on. And yes, when done well and done in a way that actually allows folks to do that, you can do that with community land trust. But I don't think it's a complete, it's not all that there is. And I think we need to be real clear about, we need to build equity within our community. So ownership is real. And we want to make sure that we're including that in our opportunities for wealth creation and stability within our communities, in particular the Black community.
We only got a couple of moments left, Majora, but I wanted for you to give some next steps. People are excited. People want to change, the traditions in their family. They want to, I think people want to learn more about how we can stay in our neighborhoods and not feeling like somebody is pushing us out. Can you give us a solid 3 steps or a couple of things that we can do right now to help people to understand this? I mean, outside of buying your book, of course.
Yes. Oh, and it's interesting. Do buy my book and buy more than 10 copies. So if you've got like a neighborhood association or a book association or a book club, and you buy 10 or more books before March 1st, I will personally Zoom into your book club. I mean, depending on where you are, I might be able to come visit you in person to COVID, be damned, hopefully. And, I'm happy to do that too. But if you buy them before March 1st, and we can schedule it out into the year. So it's not like we can do it. We have to do it right now. But I'm delighted to do that. And I'm doing my first one tonight, which I'm super excited about. But I think one of the things you want to do is number one, and this is going to sound sort of goofy, but just take a second look at the neighborhood that you're in right now and start thinking about what are some opportunities for you to sort of think about reclaiming. Like, is it the development of a business? Is it staying in your family's house? Is it, talking to somebody else who you think might be interested in selling so they don't sell to a predatory speculator? Are there opportunities? Number one, number two, just please assume that you're not, that poverty is not a cultural attribute within our communities, that it's not part of our DNA. Okay. So don't.
Wait a minute. Hold on, Majora. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? I just think that the people in the back and in the chat need to hear that. Poverty is not a what?
It's not a cultural attribute. Okay. That is not us. Even though I do think that in particular, the nonprofit industrial complex, sort of treats our communities as if that's all we'll ever be, which leaves us really vulnerable, open to predatory speculation, just from a land, grab kind of situation. But it also makes us want to move out of our neighborhoods, which again leaves us open and vulnerable to somebody else coming in and developing it for us. So there's that. And I think that the real thing, the last thing is, you can make a real difference wherever you are in your own community, and it doesn't have to be a huge project. The little things matter, and you just need to embrace that and know that it's true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Majora Carter, I am so excited. I'm so thankful that you were able to spend some time with us this evening or this afternoon to talk about the work that you're doing, but most importantly, talking about your book, Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. Folks, the book is available, is on sale. Majora, just to let folks know clearly, how can they get a copy of your book?
Sure. I think the best thing you can do is if you could support a local bookstore, because they're independent booksellers in your own community. That's the best place to go. And you can even find it on bookshop.org, because it literally puts the sale through your local bookseller. They're also available on Amazon, wherever you buy your books. And, that's the best thing you could do, I think.
Awesome. Majora, thank you so much. We look forward to continuing this conversation, and we would love to have you back on for discussions about this, about other issues. So thank you so much, sis. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that you guys do. This is an amazing show, and I so appreciate you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Blessing.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick pause. When we come back, We got some final thoughts around the show. Stay with us. It's The Culture on the Black Star Network.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show, Get Wealthy, focuses on the things that your financial advisor and bank isn't telling you, but you absolutely need to know. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is.
Oh, no punches! I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Let me bring my culture crew back in here, Shaquaya McKenzie and Bakari Jones. First and foremost, ladies, y'all were a little bit too excited to talk about housing.
Well, in my mind, Farajii, I'm going to be a lawyer, a real estate developer,
right,
and a leader in the tech industry. I've got my mind on all these things all the time. So whenever I hear someone who's really deep in stock in the work, it's exciting. And I mean, I can't wait to learn about more of what she's doing through her book and hopefully through a personal connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, y'all were fantastic, and I appreciate the questions and the sentiment. So that is what's up. Now, as we wrap up the show for today and for the week, I wanted to bring some things to light, speaking about the beauty and the power of the Black woman. If you did not know, folks, I like to call this segment Telling Our Story, because I think, Bakari, it's important that we tell our story. Now, there is a new biopic that is going to be airing very soon, featuring the beautiful one and only Viola Davis as FLOTUS. I'm not talking about Joe Biden. I'm talking about the one and only Michelle Obama. Check out this new picture, this new film.
How do you really feel about being First Lady?
In 4 years, I don't want to look back and think What did I become living in that house?
It is my great honor to introduce to you the First Lady of the United States. Oh, still got it.
Never lost it.
The First Lady has to be a special kind of woman.
I can't have you backseat driving.
They want to turn me into a Black Martha Stewart? I will pick my team, choose my causes, understood?
You knew what you were getting into.
You kept your political dreams a secret from me.
I'll be here for you.
But I am going to be myself.
My hands are tied.
Don't push me off. I am your wife, not one of your girlfriends. You are the husband of a wife who has a mind and a life of her own. They think I should keep my mouth shut.
This is your chance to make history.
I'm just terrified of my girls.
I couldn't bear to watch you destroy yourself.
I have done everything I was supposed to do.
The world is always going to judge us.
They can kick me out, but they can't make me somebody I'm not.
So
I'm excited to watch.
I'm extremely excited to watch.
I'm
I think that Viola Davis.
Oh,
yeah, huge Viola fan. And I was a little nervous about what her interpretation and the way she'd come off in terms of, you know, how we kind of castigate people. I don't know. I'm gonna speak for myself. Once people play a certain role, I kind of always see them in that role unless they shatter it. And something else they're given. And I can see her playing Michelle so authentically in that trailer. I mean, it's
just all of that. It's like to play someone who is still alive currently. I feel like that's a whole nother level just in and of itself. So I'm excited to watch. I think that I'm also looking forward to just like hearing all the like behind the scenes stuff that she has to share her interview.
Michelle had to be there, right? Like, I'm assuming Michelle had to be coaching her through this role.
I imagine. And then I'm like, how much does she? I know she's the type of actor in general who, you know, I'm sure she's like deep in her study. You know, she's probably looking into all the footage, all of the behind the scenes context about Michelle. This is all interesting. I'm looking forward to it. This is April. It was Women's History Month, but April will cut it. So.
Yeah, this is great. I anticipate, I hope I'm not being biased in saying this. I anticipate that all of the women will play their roles well or have played their roles well, in so much that, you know how some people can stick out. I don't want to say Viola's going to stick out because I believe Michelle Pfeiffer, they all look like they did an amazing job. But because of the contemporary nature of our FLOTUS, I think this is going to be great. Great.
I mean, first and foremost, I have to be honest with you. I never thought that I would see Viola Davis play Michelle Obama. I just never thought, like, you know, physically, you just don't think, oh, well. But then when I saw this, I was like, ooh, okay. Now, of course, this film is through the lens of all of the, you know, first ladies of different presidents, and talking about their ups and downs, their achievements, and at the same time, some of the tragedies. But I think it's a powerful. I think this is going to be a very powerful thing, and it's interesting that we have not seen Michelle Obama, and I know we talk about it, but I don't think we've really seen it on screen to put Michelle Obama in the context as those previous first ladies. You know what I'm saying? Like Michelle Obama to us, I mean, we grew up watching her going into office, so we have a different lens that we see her through. We see Barack different, but when you stack her up against, okay, Miss Betty Ford, you know, Nancy Reagan, or the wife of you know, Eleanor Roosevelt. When you start to put her in that context, it brings it says a lot more. It says a lot more. Bakari, what's your take on that?
Farajii, both of us are excited. Are we having a watch party on the channel? I mean, I'm excited to watch. I have a lot of respect for Michelle Obama. For me, I love food. I mean, I know we all care about food to some extent. We need it to survive, but I think in terms of her initiatives that are around the things specifically that Black and brown people have immediate access to, which is food and how we move our bodies, those are the things that I was like super excited about as it relates to her, just her legacy that she's leaving behind. So I'm excited to watch and engage and see how this contributes to, some of the positive light that's shed on Michelle Obama. She still is talked about because of the color of her skin, but she's a brilliant woman who happens to also be the FLOTUS. So our forever FLOTUS, I'll say. So
our forever FLOTUS. Our forever FLOTUS. I remember watching her, Shaquaya. She did the documentary Becoming, based upon her book, when her book came out, and just seeing how she moved, how she thought, you know what I mean? Just seeing parts of her, you know what I mean? Like I feel like she's probably more popular than Barack.
No question.
You said
no question, right? Because she didn't have to be in such a contentious role, to be fair, and also because of her evolving grace. I think whether you are a person of color, a girl of color, a woman of color, or a man of color, or aside from that, just an American, you were proud of a woman that held herself with strength, with grace, with someone who was discernibly them own selves. She didn't seem like she ever compromised in who she was, or compromised in how she wanted to be represented. And that clearly was a part of the trailer there. And so she is very well liked, right? Like her approval ratings had, I think at one point, beat out any president in any history and any first lady in history. And that just speaks to who she is, right? But, our forever FLOTUS. But I love what you said about how I don't think there had ever been, I mean, I'm sure there have been documentaries and probably some featured media where there was an anthology of stories told of first ladies, but never this riveting. It doesn't seem, I don't know if there's ever been any other visual version of what they're doing now. But what I love about that is the opportunity that we have to see the intersection of challenge and perplexity that exists in the unfolding of the becoming of the first woman. It's not just the first lady, right? Because it's a role. It's temporal. It's a chasm in time, but it's the evolution of the person prior to them being in that seat in office, in that seat in office, and then thinking about their legacy and the road ahead and what they like to do. And clearly, with the work that Michelle and Barack continue to do, she was, it seems, was very intentional and mindful of that. And so I'm interested in seeing how they captured that in the biopic.
Yeah, I'm happy that Barack plays kind of a supporting role. You know what I mean? I like the whole take of the film. I can't wait to see it, folks. It's going to be streaming on Showtime in April. This was their first look. You got to see it here on the Black Star Network, and it's going to be more than interesting. And I think that we should, once it comes out, I think we should really have some much deeper conversations about the power of the woman in the White House, right? Because a lot of, like you mentioned, Bakari, we and Shaquaya, that both, a lot of times we say it's just a role, but they are actually determining and dictating policy, especially for children, and that's something that we have to keep in mind. Like the first lady is almost like the first mother of the country. Mm-hmm. So, when you're dictating policy, from whether it's health and wellness, whether you're talking about, literacy, whether you're talking about drugs and crime, you're dictating policy. And that is a very, very pivotal role. But what I see with Michelle that I would be interested to see and play out in this film is that Michelle was Barack's partner. That was like his unofficial, official partner. That was his metric of whether he should move forward or he should stay back from an issue. I know it was. Smart. I absolutely know it was, because that's your wife, man. That's your wife. So, she is a capable woman, a very brilliant woman, and we'll try to bring her on to the culture one day.
Yeah, make sure it's this episode.
Right.
We'll try to bring her to the culture.
Nara won't let you leave her out of it. So bring Nara on. We'll make it
right. All right, ladies. I appreciate y'all. Shaquan McKenzie, Bakari Jones. Thank y'all so much for being a part of the conversation today here on The Culture and being so good for the culture here on the Black Star Network. Thank you, sisters.
Peace. Always love.
Awesome. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us. I thank all of you for tuning in tonight. Your comments, your participation, and most importantly, your viewership is absolutely critical. We cannot thank you enough, and we continue to need your support here at Black Star Network. Make sure you do your part to support us, providing us with any type of donation that you think would be helpful. We're not trying to break your pockets. We're just trying to sustain Black-owned media. Support the Black Star Network at blackstarnetwork.com, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, Zelle, doesn't matter. Tell your friends and family to stream us all on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And we're on all platforms, Roku, Fire TV, Xbox, Android TV. You name it, we're there. Download the app. It's all for free. Become a member and make sure that you tune into all of the wonderful programming here on the Black Star Network. That's going to do it for me. I appreciate you. As always, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong. Stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. God willing, we'll talk to each other on Monday. Have a safe and blessed weekend, folks. And we'll talk tomorrow on Monday for another exciting edition of The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. Peace.